books, and I've published nothing. When I think of writers, I think of John, are you still there? John Nichols, who complains to me that he can't come in for his office appointment at 11:45 because he writes all night and that's too early. As a family practitioner, I appreciate Ellen and Mark and Lucas and Yori and Patrick and Gina and Lindsay, and my brother and my nephew being here. As a family practitioner in this crazy, wonderful, weird town, I've been immersed in people's lives, sometimes very abruptly. I've seen helped a lot of your children being birthed, some of your parents crossing over, some of your spouses in their final stage, and watched as we've all aged together. So I decided 6 years ago to take a memoir course that Veronica Golos was giving. There was only one problem: I have a terrible memory. So when I started writing, I didn't know whether I was fictionalizing my entire life. And when I was a kid, I had this fantasy or nightmare that I was playing second base for the New York Yankees, having pushed Bobby Richardson out of the way. And it was the top of the ninth, and the pop ball was hit right to me. 56,800 people were watching me grab the pop ball and hit the mitt and fell out. And so in my great fantasy world, when I started writing, I imagined being a little grandiose, being on the Oprah show. And Oprah reading my vignettes and saying how wonderful it was. And then person by person from my past, from my ex-wife, that's not the way it happened. And my children come out and say, Pop, it never transpired that way. And nurses saying, were you practicing the same hospital I was in? So I went to Veronica. I didn't tell her all that. I just told her I was having trouble knowing what my truth was. And she said, your truth is your truth, and your memory is your memory, as long as you don't lie. And then I remember what my mother said. My mother always said, there's no sense telling a good story if you can't exaggerate. When I first came to town, I worked at the Cuesta Health Center. I was 29 years old, had 3 little kids, and it was a federally funded clinic. And medicine was different then, just like the town is different. I mean, we changed culturally, population-wise. Remember when there were 2 lights? Yeah. There was the light at the plaza and the blinking light. Not the old blinking light, because it was the light. And medicine has changed just drastically. When I first came, there were no emergency room doctors. So you'd be in your office, if you were in town, or I did the night shift because I was at Cuesta, doing a pap smear, and they bring someone in with a gunshot wound to the chest. And you go, Jesus Christ, what am I going to do? And you run over to the hospital and do the best you could. We had surgeons intermittently. Steve Citrullo took a 4-year hiatus when I first came to go up to Wyoming and race Ferraris or something. We had no emergency room doctors, no hospitalists. So if you admitted someone to the hospital, you took care of them 24 hours a day. We had no orthopedists. Herb wasn't here. Lubowitz wasn't even in the background. Goodman wasn't here. We had, at times, no surgeons. And we had, everybody remembers Al Rosen. Al would come in when you needed a surgery, a C-section, with his bathrobe on and a cigar in his mouth. And he'd put the cigar down, and you'd introduce him to the patient. Say, I know him, I met him. Take his bathrobe off, put his scrubs on, cut the baby out, put his bathrobe on, take his cigar and go on. So the first story I'm going to read is called Mr. Jablonsky. Now, Charlie Bonfante's out of town. Charlie's worked with me as a physician assistant, worked with Ellen for 38 years. And I went over the story because Charlie and I worked across the clinic, and he remembered it like I remembered it, which was truly amazing. So this is not based on a true story. This, I think, is a true story. Mr. Jablonsky. It was the end of the 60s in Taos, New Mexico. The 60s here, like everywhere else, started in 1967 and ended in 1980 with the election of Ronald Reagan. So a summer day, 1976, Manby Hot Springs, Arroyo Hondo. I'm a bit awkward, dutifully naked, with my 3 oldest kids in the same lukewarm springs made famous by Dennis Hopper in the movie Easy Rider. "Where did you get that boo-boo on your butt?" asked my youngest wide-eyed son, Lucas. Always a good diagnosis. Looking over my right shoulder at the large, ecchymotic orange and purple bruise, I smiled and cringed simultaneously. It was my fault. It began appropriately enough with pity. Pity for Police Chief William Taggart. Chief Taggart had that Don Knotts quality about him. All 5 feet 6 inches, 115 pounds of him, one of the worst essential tremors I've ever seen. Not too appealing for the sole law enforcement agent in the small town of Cuesta. Elevation 7,500 feet, population 1,000, in the heart of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains of northern New Mexico. Doing his annual physical for the police academy, I was to make sure he qualified physically and endurance-wise for his pivotal role. But the chief appealed to me. His back was out. He could not do the required push-ups and sit-ups. And gee, Doc, I need the job. Young and wanting to please and totally insecure, I took the low road and passed him on his physical. After all, who needed a macho cop in this idyllic place? Only a few hippies got beat up occasionally at the Kiowa Lounge, no big deal. And then, a few days later, the EMTs brought in Mr. Jablonsky to the Cuesta Health Center. Just a week before, I lectured the medics on handling the combative patient. And oh, how I loved to teach in those days, and especially to be proven right. So when the medics brought in Jablonsky, a potentially dangerous and psychotic patient, I took it as an opportunity to teach and to shine. Astutely, I sized him up, realizing something was not quite right. This wild-haired Eastern European started hallucinating. I looked at his eyes and noticed his glasses lacked one important component: lenses. Obviously paranoid schizophrenic, he was rambling in English and Polish, obsessing about his hemorrhoids. But he wouldn't allow me within 3 feet of his anal varicose. Then Aloysius Cisneros, God bless her, my trusted LPM, remembering a prior patient, asked if she should summon the Polish translator. Knowing Mrs. Shukovitz lived 20 miles north in Kostia, on the Colorado line, and as a full-time maid, had little expertise with psychotic, eyeglass, lensless men with bleeding hemorrhoids. I shook my head. Jablonsky got more excited. I couldn't help notice the EMTs over my shoulder. I enjoyed the attention and looked forward to a satisfactory resolution. Jablonsky kept on about his hemorrhoids and his need for psychic healing, not including a proctoscopic exam. So then I summed it up. Well, Mr. Jablonsky, I think you need a hospital. Yes, Jablonsky enthusiastically concurred. And a hospital that could treat your hemorrhoids and your justifiable emotional needs. Jablonsky nodded, agreeing with every word. Therefore, the best hospital is the State Psychiatric Hospital, just over the pass in Las Vegas, New Mexico. Again, Jablonsky nodded at my suggestions as if they were written on slate. And finally, since you have no car, our gentle police chief, William Taggart, will gladly transport. A final nod and a smile from my patient, and admiring glances from the audience of the two EMTs. As Chief Taggart was summoned, I waited almost anticlimactically. The chief nervously pulled into the parking lot of the Cuesta Health Center. Just then, Jablonsky started to unravel, waving his arms, shaking his head back and forth, getting more and more excited and more agitated. I cannot lose it now. This is just a little bump in the road. So cocky and self-assured, I tried to calm down the now seething and actively hallucinating visiting Pole. I thought he was ready to charge the hyperthyroid chief. Now, Mr. Jablonsky, don't get upset. No one will hurt you, I assured him. Jablonsky lit up, eyes bulged out, and then almost too calmly pronounced, "The only one who'll get hurt is you, doctor." With that statement, he grabbed the chief's billy club and went after me. I took off running as fast as my transported New York legs would carry me across the parking lot. He threw the lead-lined club and caught me square in my right gluteus maximus. Luckily, the only place in my body that would not break. I was fast and frightened and continued to run. Don't worry, I thought. The police are here. And Chief Taggart took out his revolver and aimed. I turned and watched with horror, his arms shaking, holding the gun. This underqualified testosterone-deficient cop nearly passed his test by my dishonesty. I yelled, "Don't shoot, Chief!" Sure that he would miss the psychotic Pole and kill the neurotic Jew. Taggart dropped his gun by his side, and knowing his own capabilities, did what he did best, nothing. My hand shaking, I opened the truck door. As I tried to start the ignition, Jablonsky, having reclaimed the club, jumped on the hood and was about to smash in the windshield. Just as abruptly, he must have heard some of my ancestors creeping into his hallucinations, pleading for mercy, and he dropped the club, and departed gingerly, almost daintily, from the hood of my truck. Taggart, always the opportunist, sprung back into action and handcuffed the now passive suspect and saved the day. So, son, that's how your father got his boo-boo on his butt. The summer you turned 2 back in 1978.